Welcome to Collective Conversations. I'm your host, Casey Patterson. For those of you who do not know me, I'm the founder and chief architect of Social Good Solutions. We are a Black woman-owned and majority-operated social impact consulting firm. And we work at the intersection of philanthropy. Thank you, Cam. We work at the intersection of philanthropy, community, and racial justice. I'm also the founder and chief architect of the Black Equity Collective. And our mission is to join funders and communities together to strengthen the long-term sustainability of Black-led and Black empowering organizations. And we focus on this mission because we know that throughout history, Black folks have been on the front lines driving social and political change that benefits everyone. And when we invest in the long-term sustainability of Black-led and empowering organizations, we know that we are positioning them to create the conditions to transform systems and structures so that Black folks here in Los Angeles and across California can thrive. But in order to pioneer the kind of transformation we really envision, we need to be able to tap in to one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal, and that is the power of imagination. So we create these spaces and curate these conversations so that we can dream out loud together about Black possibilities. That is why it is my profound honor to have our guest with us tonight. She served in the capacity as founding executive director for a decade before she turned her sights to public office. In 2004, she was elected to the California State Assembly, and at the time of her election, she was the only Black woman in the entire California legislature. 4 years later, she was elected Speaker of the California State Assembly, and with that became the first Black woman in the history of the United States to have that position. In 2010, she ran for Congress and won her election by over 80% of the vote. In 2012, she founded the first congressional caucus on foster youth and garnered over $1 billion in federal aid for Africa. A decade later, she came home and added another first to her many firsts that are on her resume. And in November 2022, she was elected the first woman in the history of Los Angeles to be mayor. She is someone that I've looked up to for a long time and have admired from afar. Y'all, tonight, we are not just hearing from a leader, a thinker, an innovator. We are hearing from a woman who is a historical figure. Please get up on your feet and give a warm Black Equity Collective welcome to the Mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Bass. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Have a seat. So, Mayor, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for such a warm introduction.
Oh, thank you. I started off the introduction by saying that this is a space where we like to dream out loud about Black possibilities. And I know as part of your administration, you have a big vision. So I wonder if you could just start by telling us, when you think about Black possibilities, what comes to mind for you?
Well, a couple of things. One, first of all, let me just say that I love being here. Well, I think this may be my third or fourth time. Where's Bridget? I think I've been here a few times, but I really enjoy, this is such a great space, period. But also to be here and to be looking at my colleague, Sydney Kamlaker-Dove, who I'm sure we'll get into later, but I was able to run for mayor because she was willing to run for Congress. You know, it's about making sure that who comes after you will be very serious about what they're doing and doing it for the right reason. But in terms of my vision is to get, Black folk off the street. I mean,
Yes, yes. We can all clap for that.
oh, and there's a generation that has grown up thinking that this is the way it is, and it isn't. And I'm getting ready to do this trip one to the African American Mayors Association. But I, want to talk to a lot of our Black civil rights leaders and national leaders because they're not talking about this issue. And if you look at incarceration rates, the extreme disproportionality in incarceration rates around the country. Doesn't matter what city, what state, right? The same thing is with the unhoused population. I don't care what city you go to, it is disproportionately African American. And how can we accept Black folks being 8% of the population of the city and over 30% of the people in those tents? That's just so unacceptable to me. And now I'm worried about a Supreme Court decision that's going to come up that could lead to the criminalization of people on the streets. But I'm sure we'll get into that if you want to.
Yes, I want to. So thank you for that, because I think that there are a lot of folks in the room. We have a lot of nonprofit founders and leaders in the room who I think have watched your career, myself included. And I consider you to be a people's mayor, a community mayor.
Thank you.
You came out.
Best thing you can say.
A community mayor. You came out of community. So I'm wondering, how do you want the nonprofit sector to partner with your administration, and what can the nonprofit sector expect out of your administration in ways that maybe they hadn't seen before?
Well, and also let me back to that last question.
Sure.
That was talking about the unhoused, but the housed being able to afford housing because there's a generation that doesn't know if you'll ever be able to afford a home. Making sure that Black folks get hired in jobs because we have to affirmatively do that. You can't just expect it to happen. And also for our businesses to grow. And we have all of these major international events coming up. And we have to make sure that we're able to access resources from that. Now I'm trying to remember what you asked me.
I asked you about partnering with your administration.
Yes. Sector. Well, I still feel like I'm from the nonprofit sector.
Okay, tell us more. Yes, I really want to get into that.
Yeah. To me, the nonprofit sector is critically important. When I was in Congress, you mentioned I started a caucus, but I also started a nonprofit organization called the National Foster Youth Foundation. And I did that because there really I did not find people in DC who were willing to transform the system. Not just make sure your project is funded, but the system needs fundamental transformation. And so I started that organization. And then all of the work that I'm doing around the unhoused, it's the nonprofits that are doing the work. So for example, when we move people out of tents into motels, it's the nonprofit organizations that take care of the people once they're in the motels. So I feel very passionately about the nonprofit sector. And I already know what one of my dreams of what I want to do when I'm done with elected office, which this is the last one.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm positive. Yeah. It's very important to stop. But because what I really would dream to do is to create an incubator, especially for nonprofits that are Black-led, Latino-led, but in South LA, because what happened as I was leaving Community Coalition is that major nonprofits kind of moved in and the smaller nonprofits went by the wayside. Hi, Fran Jamont, one of my mentors. Think you're going to sneak in here and I'm not going to call you out.
we call her the godmother of Black philanthropy.
Well, let me tell you, she was my godmother too. I met Fran early on, and she helped me develop Community Coalition. I say that aside from the fact that I love this lady, but I say that because that's something that we all need to do for each other. If you really believe in social change and fundamental social change, you have to be as invested in who comes next and who else is there than you do in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I just think, and then, after a while, you recognize that social change is something you're always going to fight for. It's never going to end. I think when I was younger, I thought we're going to win this and that's going to be it. No.
These are generational battles.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you do everything you can to pass that baton and to make sure that those coming up are fully prepared. So that's the role Fran played with me, and I know that's the role Fran has played with a lot of other people.
Absolutely. That's why we call her the godmother of
Yeah.
Black philanthropy. She's mentored a lot of us.
She said I wasn't trying to get all this attention.
But I really appreciate you mentioning how to prepare for what's coming behind you,
Yeah.
particularly as a nonprofit founder. I think this is one of the things that honestly, Mayor, has fascinated me so much about your leadership journey. Because when you founded the coalition now over 30 years ago, you were also working full time and not unlike many folks in the room who start nonprofits because they see a need in the
Yeah.
community that's being unfulfilled, but they're still working full time. And so I'm curious, when you think back on your own leadership journey and talking to the folks who run nonprofits in the room who are trying to make that decision between how do I now throw myself full time into this versus still, working full time. What helped you to make the decision to say, I'm gonna now give Community Coalition my full attention?
Well, very practically, just a couple things. One, when I started Community Coalition, I knew absolutely nothing about the nonprofit sector, nor did I know what an executive director was, even though that was my title. So, so I had to go take seminars to figure out what this job was. But I was actually a full-time faculty member at USC Medical School at the time. And I have always been driven by issues. I've never been driven by positions. I've never viewed this as a career. I was not thinking about running for mayor. But I'm at an interesting place in my life because I kind of feel like my life has come full circle. So what led me to start Community Coalition 34 years ago, actually, was because we saw this phenomena happening. We had crack cocaine. And for those of you that were too young to remember that time period, you do remember COVID. And crack, I don't know if you would agree with this, Fran, but in a way, crack kind of felt like COVID, but it just hit the Black community. I mean, we were desperate. I was panicked. I felt like Black folks were just going to all die because we had crack. We had AIDS. We didn't know how AIDS was being transmitted. It wasn't called HIV. We were watching people die. We had 1,000 homicides that year. People were sleeping in their bathtubs because of gunfire. And so it just felt like the Black community was collapsing. And so I became obsessed behind that. And then I started the coalition to try to figure out how we could shift the agenda because I saw society and politicians passing laws to incarcerate people who I thought had a health problem. And I thought it was a health problem, it was a social, it was an economic problem. That's why I started Community Coalition. Again, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I learned along the way. And so fast forward up to today, I feel like I was watching the same thing getting ready to happen again. But this time, what was going to be criminalized was the unhoused. And so that's why I left Congress. I wasn't even trying to leave Congress. I was okay there. But I just couldn't live with myself to continue a great job. I hope Sydney thinks so. and watch the city fall back into what I saw in the 1990s. And, the city a couple of years ago, and it's not like we're out of this, but people were so frustrated. People had taxed themselves 3 times and the problem just kept getting worse. And people were like, I'm sick of this. Just get rid of these people. And when you start doing that, where are you going to get rid of them to? It's going to start that cycle again of arresting people. And so that's why I did this. And so I feel like I've come full circle. In 1993 at COCO, we were trying to house unhoused, then in motels, and everybody laughed at us.
And now
30 years later, there's motels. I mean, there were 54 motels in South LA and no tourists. So to me, if you used the motels for housing, you were taking care of 2 problems. You were dealing with a criminal element. You were dealing with prostitution, drug dealing, and all of that. Today, it's sex trafficking and it's girls, children. Drive down Figueroa at night, south of Slauson, and you will see girls. Most of them foster girls, by the way. Overwhelming majority.
Yeah. disproportionately.
Right.
Yeah, disproportionate. So we're still trying to solve, many of the same issues and problems that maybe just sort of get reinvented really by a lot of systemic failures and structural inequities that we see. And we know that many of our nonprofit organizations, our Black-led organizations, are really on the front lines, fighting social injustice, and really, particularly during COVID, really became community first responders, and really sort of found themselves becoming more than their mission. Their mission may have been education, but all of a sudden they were food pantries, and all of a sudden they were doing, housing work. And so this sort of intersectional space, that you have found yourself in as a leader is something that I think a lot of nonprofit founders in the room can resonate with. I'm curious, again, sort of looking back on your journey with the coalition. I recently learned actually that the coalition was first fiscally sponsored before it became an independent organization.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, which is an interesting journey that a lot of organizations find themselves in, ourselves included. So the Black Equity Collective is also fiscally sponsored. And I'm curious how you navigated the journey of moving from a fiscally sponsored project to a fully independent organization, particularly at a time when racial equity and movement building was not part of sort of the mainstream thinking of philanthropy. How did you make that journey from project to independence? Because thinking about long-term sustainability.
Yeah, you did ask me, how did I move from working full time? Well, I was extremely fortunate. My boss at the time helped me write a grant to the federal government. And so I was at USC. I never thought the federal government would fund what we were doing in South LA. So USC was the fiscal sponsor. And but my first grant, though, came from the Liberty Hill Foundation.
Woo-hoo! Shane in the house.
Yeah, so it was Liberty Hill seed money that put us in a position to put on a conference. Then we found out about federal funding, and we applied for federal funding, and we got that funding. So I actually stayed working at USC, technically. So I had the incredible privilege to not have to worry about the administration of the funds for 5 years. So it allowed me to develop the program. And frankly, it was my board that made us become independent, because I'm like, no, this is a good thing.
This is good. Yeah. I know the feeling.
I, again, was reluctant. Now, today, you can go to college and study nonprofit management, okay? That didn't exist before. So, you start this work and you're just kind of creating it, and it's OJT. You can't go take a class to learn how to do. And by the way, they were not really social justice nonprofits then. As a matter of fact, a lot of the people that did social justice work didn't want to be associated with mainstream funders and mainstream organizations. And some people were critical of me, for doing that. But I'm like, people are dying, and criticize me if you want. Frankly, I get a lot of that now. That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit when you mentioned the Congresswoman about sort of the pipeline of leadership. One of the things that has always struck me about the coalition is there is a sense of pride that comes with working at the coalition, with being affiliated with the coalition. It sort of reminds me a little bit, I was watching the women's championship game yesterday, the NCAA championship, and there's this sense of pride around being affiliated with the school, of being a Gamecock or being an Iowan. And I'm curious, how did you actually build a culture that would have that kind of identity? Wherever I go and I meet somebody who worked for the coalition, they wear it like a badge of honor.
That's nice.
And that they came from COCO. I have a former COCO staff member who's on our team now, who was on the executive committee, another one who's currently on the executive committee. And of somebody who came from COCO. Like, there is a way that they show up and a way that they work. And
I love that.
And I'm so curious about how you built a culture that would embody this kind of pride and this kind of identity and still speak your name after 34 years and still really embody the kind of values that you instilled. And I'll just say this really quickly because I think there's something in the room around founders' fear about leaving their organization.
Yeah.
You know,
Thank you. That's
and
one of my
and when
favorite
they
topics.
when they leave their organizations, there's this fear that, you know, either the organization won't look anything like what they started, or it won't recognize them as the founder anymore, or they won't be able to actually evolve because they fear that it's going to collapse the second they walk out the door. But you have found this sweet spot where there's this pride, there's this identity, there's this value that's really instilled in Coco, and they can lead wherever. You know, they can lead in your administration, they can lead any other nonprofit, they can lead wherever. And I'm curious, when you talk to founders and nonprofit leaders, how do you help them to think about how to build their organizational culture?
Well, first of all, what you described, thank you so much, because that was the goal. It was very conscious and very deliberate.
Yes.
And it's a servant leadership style. And truly that. And it is not about you. And so it's de-emphasizing the ego. And then I was doggedly determined to start an organization, to build it, to train the leadership, and to get the heck out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I said I was going to stay 10 years. I stayed 14.
Mm-hmm.
I left. I never wanted to be on the board. They know they can call me 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
but, and they call me periodically. Most of the time they don't. I could not tell you what the coalition is working on now. It was most important to instill a set of values. And the value is understanding that the job is fighting for social and economic change and justice. It is not about an individual personality. I have a funny story, though, is that I am so committed to that as a set of values, and not using I, talking about we, not promoting myself, promoting the issues. So I had a tough time when I first ran for office because I didn't know how to say I.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember a friend pulling me aside and saying, look, you're the one running for office. The Community Coalition is not running for office. And you have to learn how to talk about yourself. That was a real shift.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to accept to do it because I knew if I told my story, it was tied to what we were fighting for. And so to me, when people get hung up on, well, if I leave, it's going to do this, it's going to do, that's about you. And it really shouldn't be. It should be about what you're fighting for and what your mission is. And so what you should want to do is to walk away. And it's also a basic principle of community organizing is that you organize yourself out of job. And I think that's one of the problems that nonprofits can get into. And even social service organizations can get into. You don't want to get invested in the problem. You want to get invested in the solution so that the problem goes away. But you don't want to say, I want to continue having people unhoused because that's what pays my check. And you know, and we do this in foreign policy as well. And what I said to groups that were working in Africa, because that's the other thing I did in DC, was focused on foreign policy. And, you know, when we give foreign aid, you know, most of the money is going to us. We fund ourselves to go over and take care of Africans. And I'm like, why don't you just fund the Africans? Like, oh, well, we can't do that. I said, look, there are always going to be poor people. You'll always be able to, if that's your thing, the poor people aren't going away.
Mm-hmm.
But why would you want to create an organization that is dependent on you? Why would you want to do that?
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good. What do you look for in a leader?
Well, I mean, what I look for is somebody that is kind of just saying that somebody that is committed to a mission and not to themselves. So people ask me, you know, like I said a few minutes ago about my career, and I've never thought about it like this. Most of the things I've done, especially leadership positions I have run for, been involved in, were actually not something I was pursuing. So I look at a leader or who I want to develop or contribute to as somebody who is driven by a mission or an issue and not by their own personal advancement and career, which is not to say you don't pay attention to that. But if that's really your motivator, then, there's a lot of things you can do in life. But fighting for your folks, I think if your ego gets in the way of that, then that's a problem. And then our folks wind up not being served.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good. When you are sort of looking out ahead and sort of looking out to the future, and you see young people, I know the coalition, for example, is very focused on organizing youth and young people. What do you want the leaders of today to be thinking about when we are preparing the leaders of tomorrow?
Well, I'm worried, frankly. There's a number of things that worry me. Social media is this incredible tool. But as I've experienced some people coming up now, I think they confuse social media with actual leadership. So in other words, it's great you got a whole bunch of Twitter followers. Are they people?
Yeah.
I mean, I had to deal with that with some new members of Congress. And I remember...
Hashtag activism.
Well, I remember saying, because one person told me, well, I can't do that because my followers... I'm like, ugh. And she was talking about her Twitter followers. I said, but if you want to pass legislation in Congress, you got to get 217 real people to vote for that. So I worry that in this new period that people confuse organizing with social media and Twitter.
Yeah, I think that's really a tension that we're experiencing in the movement right now, particularly with organizers, right? Like there's this tension between sort of quote unquote old guard and what happens with sort of more traditional community organizing, and what is sort of a new wave of how we work, how we engage, how we participate. And it feels like sometimes they're in opposition, but nothing, I mean, I think we learned this through watching your campaign, like nothing actually beats ground game. Nothing actually beats knocking on doors and engaging one-on-one with people. So as founders, as executive directors who are trying to move their organizations into the future, what advice would you give around embracing sort of some of the new technology and new ways versus holding on to what feels really true?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to find what's true in the new tech. I mean, I think the new technology it's not him anymore.
It's not.
But I mean, I think it is amazing. The organizing potential is phenomenal. But it should be organizing and it shouldn't be just about yourself. I got a problem with why people need to share everything. It's like, I'm glad you had that for lunch. But anyway, but I think maybe a way of describing it is there needs to be more strategic thinking about how to use these tools to advance issues, not just yourself, promoting yourself. And so that's what I worry about. I worry about a resurgence of individualism.
Yeah.
And, and then there's a lot of people are worried about their mental health and self-care and all of those things. I think all of that is good, but, and I don't think changing yourself is equal to social change.
Tell me more. Say more about that, if you will.
I mean, I think that there's some folks I've engaged with that feel that, their contribution is themselves, like changing myself, making sure I eat right or I say the right things, right? It's just like, okay, but you one person. I mean, I don't know how that rings about social change. Say you changed you. Okay. That's fine.
That's good.
That ain't changing nobody else.
Who else have you changed?
People still intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that got to do with anything?
I think, we're gonna actually get some questions from the audience, but what's so powerful about this is because I mentioned in the opening around these sort of principles of Black equity that we have. And what really animates those principles for me is this belief that what we're doing is bigger than us.
Right.
And we have to be committed to our people. We have to be committed to changing the conditions that we find our people in.
Right.
And for us, the vehicle of that is actually transforming, in a lot of ways, philanthropy and the way that funding actually flows and all of the things. And so, I'm hearing you and I'm appreciating the call to action around being bigger than yourself and thinking about where you have a sphere of influence and how that influence can be really a vehicle for broader social and political change.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the value of it. And by the way, I'm glad that philanthropy, I'm going to say some name, but I'm glad that philanthropy is okay with Black people again.
It comes in waves.
I know.
Yeah.
I've seen the waves.
So we're going to Q&A on that.
Okay.
So we're going to take some questions from the audience because this is the people's mayor. This is the community's mayor. And so we want to hear from you. I am going to ask that you ask a question and not provide a testimony because the mayor's on a schedule. Okay? All right. So let's raise your hands if you have a question. Okay. We're going to go Laura, Tim, and Alex. Two.
Question. You know what? If you want, if there's a lot of questions, I kind of have a way I do that. If you want. I take good notes.
All right.
You take more than one question.
Dr. Laura, introduce yourself. Say the name of your organization and ask a question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson, and I lead the Diversity and Leadership Institute. Also a proud member of the Black Equity Collective's Executive Committee. Thank you so much for your insight, Mayor Bass. One thing that you shared, I agree with partially. I think there has been a wave of investments in Black-led organizations, but post George Floyd, we're starting to see some divestment in Black-led organizations. What would you say to philanthropy what would you share with them about this idea of divesting and the dangers of divesting in Black-led organizations?
If you want, I can do that, or we can take like 5.
Okay, let's do it. So let's take, okay, so you got that question?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll go Tim.
Good evening, Mayor Bass, Casey, and thank Casey and the BEC for putting together such an amazing space, as she always does. Black Girl Magic is real.
Thank you, Tim.
My name is Tim Cornegay. I'm the statewide director of initiatives for Live Free California, which is 20 Black-led organizations across the state, all working on social justice, racial justice, and economic justice for Black folks. But I'm also a co-director for Southern California Ceasefire, which is one of the oldest gang and gun violence intervention organizations in Southern California. And my question is this: politicians and politics are taking a hit. So for those evolving leaders and individuals who want to be in politics, who want to be in politicians, who want to have organizations, what advice would you have for those folks and for those organizations as they move forward?
So folks who want to grow from running an organization to running for office. Yeah, that's a great question, because I feel like you've done that. You went from a project to an organization to the state legislature to Congress to now running a city. So you've continued to grow your impact every step of the way. Allie had a question.
Hi, Mayor Bass. Hey, Casey.
Hi.
I'm Allie Simon. I'm the founder and ED of Black Being, which is a nonprofit well-being studio. We recently opened in Inglewood and really focused on community care for the community, for the Black community. For the Black community. And I guess my question is really, as a Black woman in leadership, like, how do you sustain yourself, really, now, and how have you sustained yourself over the years?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually a question that I also have around what did you need as a Black woman? You mentioned folks like Fran, what did you need to help support you in your leadership? as a Black woman? You want to start with those three and then see if we have time? Okay, two more. All right. She said five. She said five.
Mayor Bass. My name is Marlon Dwight. I'm with USC Annenberg Media. Thank you for Mr. being here tonight. Just real quick, if you could talk more, could you talk a little bit more about talk about the incubate you are talking about or thinking about starting later your post career. Can you talk about that idea, where it came from, and how it might benefit Black Angelinos in particular?
Good question. Thank you for that. Candy? Is that Candy that I see? Okay. Hi, Candy.
Good evening, Mayor Bass, Casey. Hi, I'm Candy Lewis, CEO at Positive Results Center. I'm also a commissioner for the City of LA for Civil and Human Rights.
Okay.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. We talked about how you do. Talked about also nonprofit leaders not staying with the company. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about how do we support nonprofit leaders, especially Black leaders in their wellness? And also, I know I'm not the only organization that's having a difficult time finding team members to join us that are good. I won't say good, but people that have the capacity, people that have the capacity to do the work, and also that are stable.
So I actually heard, Candy, thank you for that question, because I actually heard an executive director ask it like this about 5 years ago, or say it like this. She said, my most difficult challenge as an executive director is finding the combination of the right skill set and the right value set in my team members. And if I'm having to choose, I don't know if I'm choosing for skills or for values, and where and how I close the gap. And that's what I hear you asking, Candy, in that question.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all for your questions. The first one about what would I say to philanthropy about divesting. We as an American culture, and I'm talking about all of us, tend to be very ahistorical. And we do not remember history past 2 or 3 days. And so what I remember very well, and this is what I would say to philanthropy, you guys, you like us every few years. So I remember distinctly around the time I was leaving Cocoa, and philanthropy decided Black folks were no longer important, and it was Latinos. And they literally would come to Cocoa, pull Latino staff aside, and say, what's it really like? And so we had to organize and wage a little fight within philanthropy to say, we ain't going nowhere. We understand the demographics of South LA is fundamentally changing, but we're not disappearing. And I would remind them of that history. And I would remind them that every few years when your guilt meter goes up, that's when you like us again. And that they really need to look at the issues and problems that we have. They said things like they didn't understand when I left Cocoa why a Latino didn't take over as executive director. And so there had to be some education work that happened within philanthropy that was a conscious effort. You must have been involved in that. I'm sure you were. She was like, don't be calling on you. Stop. I have to lift her up. Anyway, but a number of us took on the challenge. And, it wasn't public. It was done quietly. There were no press stories about it because that wasn't the goal. So I would remind people of history and say, at some point, you need to stop doing that. Because now, fortunately, the young people at Cocoa were solid in their Black-brown understanding. And the Latino staff were offended. And it was a couple of reporters that did that. We're not talking about, it's a couple of LA Times reporters, but they were offended and they did not allow that division, to take place. In terms of ceasefire, yes, ceasefire is a great organization. And if you want to talk about that incubator, it's organizations like that. It's organizations like people that work with returning citizens. There's we spent so many years locking people up that now we actually need to create a layer of services to get people to reintegrate back in. That layer of service would have never been necessary if we would have been more strategic about how we dealt with crime. And we weren't. We just cast this big, huge net, and now our communities are paying for it because people are getting out. They've been blocked from the legal economy, and so surprise, surprise, what they do. In terms of people who might want to be elected officials afterwards, I'm always interested in talking to people about elected office because one thing that is very, very important is that if you're going to go into elected office, you need to be very clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because I'll tell you something, it'll eat you up if you're not. I have felt comfortable there probably because by the time I ran for office, I was a lot older. I'm watching young people run for office and almost getting elected by accident. And I'm very concerned about them because if they're not clear, and what I say is that you have to decide, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference? If you want to make a point, you can do that. You don't need to be elected to anything. If you want to make a difference, like I said, you got to get people to vote with you. And so I think identifying exactly what you want to accomplish in what area, and then deciding whether that institution will allow you to move the needle on those areas. In terms of how do I sustain myself and what did I need, you know what? The one thing that I think is wonderful about life, I don't think of mentors. Mentors tends to be something that you attribute with age. I've had mentors every step of the way. I have mentors now. Because it's like, once again, I had 3 weeks to go from being a member of Congress to mayor, never worked for the city before. I kind of walked in the mayor's office and went, boom. It's not like anybody sits you down and says, let me tell you how to do this job. So I have always been able to have people help me along the way. And I've never felt that I knew so much that I couldn't ask for help. Always ask for help. And then how do I sustain myself? When I can, I bike, ride, and swim. I've not been able to do that as much lately, but I do try to maintain a discipline. It's very important to me to be physically active. And then the incubator, what the incubator is that I want to take people who want to create an organization, but they don't really know how to go about it very well. Now, what our community does is we are committed to an issue, but we don't know how to be the administrator. We want to start programs. That's where all our ideas are. We got big bills, and you have to pay staff, and you have to keep your finances right. That's why I was really comfortable being a USC project. And my board was like, you've got to get independent. And I was terrified of it, mainly because what tends to happen to us is we mess up the money and then they come after us for the programs that we do. And so, anyway, that's what I want to do as an incubator. And we have a couple of incubators, but the model that I'm interested in is a model that provides much more hands-on technical assistance to help people learn how to be administrators. I learned something I would have never thought of at COCO. I learned I actually really liked administration. I liked that. But you can't just do programs. And so that's what I would want to do as an incubator. But my goal would be for the organizations to be independent. There are some incubators where their business model is to keep you dependent because you are being charged.
Do you work for the collective?
Did I say something wrong?
No, it's just like you're speaking our language. You're speaking our language. Like we're over here giving lots of head nods, and silent amens because you're speaking our language.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad. Oh, this last question. I'm trying to read my writing from the Commission on Civil Rights. How do we support Black leaders in wellness? I'm sorry. I think I goofed on the last part of that question. Oh, skills. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, so I tried this so many times at COCO. I finally decided I had to grow my own. Remember? And so that's what I did. I recruited staff straight out of high school. Some of those people you know. One of them's on city council right now. But, recruited people, and then we invested in education and training and reading. And by the way, that's one thing that I'm worried about, the young people that I see getting to office. You have to have depth of knowledge. I don't know that you can learn a lot from Twitter. Show me how. But people need to read, and they need to know history, and they need to know philosophy and theory. And I am finding that there's a level that folks are relatively superficial. They even claim certain titles, and then I ask them, well, what is that title? I mean, what does socialism mean? So one thing about young people now, which is a relatively new phenomena, people get into careers through internships. And I think that if you think about recruiting and developing staff with the values you want them to have, with the skills you want them to have, think about interns and
Growing your own.
Yeah.
Well, Mayor, before you get out of here, because I know that you're on a schedule and we appreciate your time.
This is the best part of the day.
And for us as well. We have a couple what I call rapid fire questions. These are just little personality questions that we like to just.
You're going to ask me about music and sports, please don't.
Yes. I'm going to ask you a little bit about LA.
Oh,
Okay. So you are in traffic. Would you rather be in traffic on the 405 or the 10?
that's actually a tough question. So a couple of reasons. City streets, the 10.
The 10. Okay. I think I know this one. Would you prefer a walk on the beach or a bike ride on the boardwalk?
Oh, a bike ride on the boardwalk on the beach.
The beach.
Yeah, that's where I ride. I ride on the beach. I don't ride through traffic. I ride on the beach.
Okay, you're selected for a game show. Are you choosing Price is Right or Wheel of Fortune?
You know once, right?
Which one are you choosing? Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah.
Which one are you choosing? If you could
Wheel
choose
of Fortune.
Wheel of Fortune. Me too.
Oh, okay.
Okay. When you encounter people who are not from LA, is LA more famous for its traffic or for its A-listers?
Oh, it's for its A-list. A-list, for sure.
And finally, this one's for the culture. You have a bowl of grits. What's going on them? Sugar or salt?
No. No. A little tiny bit of butter. A little tiny bit of butter. No sugar.
No sugar, no salt? Butter. Chili steak some. Y'all, hey. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for joining us tonight and being part of our collective conversation. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting
for so long. Thank you so much for being
here. And good luck to you and anything I can do to help you in your leadership or anybody else.
Thank you
Please.
so much.
Don't hesitate.
Mayor back, everybody. Thank you.